Recently, I acquired two items that were on a very short list that I have of wanted items that I've wanted to add to my Wizard of Oz collection. One of them I've been waiting 7 years to get, and the other I've been waiting for over a decade. Now, this of course made me start to think about rare items and what actually makes an item rare. Well, let's see if we can determine that today. Hello fellow Ozians, and welcome to the channel. A couple of different times that I have gone antique shopping, whether I'm in a flea market or an antique mall, I have asked different vendors if they have Wizard of Oz items, to which I will more regularly get the answer of, "Oh, Wizard of Oz, that's rare." Which of course makes me stand there and start to think it's a little misleading to label everything Wizard of Oz as quote-unquote rare. If all Wizard of Oz items are rare, then that means that nothing's common, which of course isn't true, and would also mean that all Wizard of Oz items must be worth a lot of money if they're all rare. Which also isn't true. So what exactly does the word rare mean? Well, it's essentially a relative term. Something can only be rare when it's compared to something that is more common. And something can only be common if something is rare. The two coexist. So, over the past 6 months, I've finally been able to scratch off 2 items on my wanted list to add to my Oz collection. And the first item that we'll be talking about is from well over 100 years ago. And that is the Theater magazine from January 1905. Pictured here on the cover is Lotta Faust in her Trixie Trifle costume from the original 1903 play, The Wizard of Oz. This is a pretty rare magazine, as I have literally had to wait 7 years to acquire one. The one and only other copy that I have seen of this magazine is in the collection of Jane Albright. This particular magazine is also photographed in the Wizard of Oz Collector's Treasury. Hilariously, it is the exact same one from Jane Albright's collection. So, I wonder how many other people actually have this magazine, since I haven't seen it in anyone else's collections. Anyways, I wanted to add this item because I love having representation from all of the different Wizard of Oz productions represented in my collection, and getting anything from the 1903 Broadway play is very difficult. For obvious reasons, I think, because of the age of the item. That definitely is a factor, especially with this magazine. But there are some other factors that I think we can also bring up. The first one being, have you ever heard of the Theater magazine? Probably not. It's a magazine that hasn't been issued out since 1931. Yeah. So, almost 100 years ago is when this magazine was stopped being issued out. And this magazine was only issued out for 31 years. The subject matter of this magazine was also a little more limited than other magazines in that it only covered theater productions from the New York area. So the appeal of this magazine wouldn't really have been as broad as, let's say, Life magazine, which you've probably heard of. That one was started in the 1800s and is still going today, just not in printed form, but in digital form. That magazine had a much broader appeal than this one, and I think for obvious reasons. But this magazine had a much smaller appeal and probably sold to less people, which is the reason why it ultimately was stopped being produced. Which is probably why today it's very difficult to acquire a copy of this magazine, since it probably didn't have that wide of appeal and wasn't around for that long, means that the rarity factor on this item just shoots way up. And the next item that took me 10 years to acquire was this ball-jointed doll from the Goodrow Upside Down Oz collection. She was originally released during the 70th anniversary of The Wizard of Oz in 2009. Now, of course, you're going to be wondering, with something that was released in 2009, why would it take me a decade to get this doll? That doesn't make any sense, because, obviously, the age of this item has nothing to deal with the rarity of it. This doll was only available for a couple of years. The Goodrow Doll Company was only around for 8 years, from 2006 to 2014. And it was in 2014, when that announcement was made by Paulette Goodrow herself, that I jumped on the bandwagon to start collecting these dolls, as I knew they would become very, very rare in the upcoming years. These dolls were only available from doll retailers. You definitely couldn't find these in your local toy store. These are ball-jointed dolls, and the company had not only resin ball-jointed dolls, but also vinyl ones, like Glenda here. All of the Wizard of Oz dolls that she produced were vinyl ball-jointed dolls, making them some of the more affordable ball-jointed dolls. Glenda here actually took a couple different dolls combined together to create this entire doll. One of the things that you're unfortunately not seeing is her necklace. That is here, but when I started to put the necklace on the doll, the elastic that held everything together was dry rotted and completely fell apart. So I will need to get some new elastic and reconstruct that. So that's in a bag right here on the table. But anyways, finding Glenda complete, the doll, the entire outfit, and also the crown, because her crown was actually sold separately from the doll, and it was something that I knew was going to be a real struggle to get. But miraculously, I was able to find a doll that had the crown. She did not come with a wand, in case you were wondering. Obviously, the demographic that would have bought this doll would, kind of like the magazine, be a smaller group of people. Did you ever hear about the Goodrow dolls back in 2009 when they were released? Leave a comment down below. And since the dolls were only produced for a short time, and especially since Glenda here was the first one to sell out, that makes her the rarest one. I had to spend well over $200 to create just one doll. Recently, when I went to the Wizard of Oz Museum here in Florida, they actually had the Goodrow dolls. All except for one, of course, and that's Glenda. They had another doll dressed in the Glenda outfit. Since the doll was stopped being produced in 2014, they must have had extra outfits left over, and that's why out of all of the Wizard of Oz characters, Glinda is the only character that had the outfit that was sold separately from the doll that last year that the company was around. Now, I don't know whether I'm just correlating two things that might have absolutely nothing in common, but there's certainly some similarities in that, number one, the audience that would have bought these two things is definitely much smaller and doesn't quite have a huge broad appeal. And then the second thing is that they both were available for only a small time. Certainly, those are two contributing factors of making these two items very rare. And since they're both over 100 years apart, it's kind of interesting how almost both of these items took me a full decade to acquire. While age might be a factor in rarity, I don't think it's the end-all say-all that all things that are old are rare. Certainly another great example of something that was made at least in between the two items but is definitely on the extreme rare side is the Return to Oz Dorothy doll. Now, I know this one's on the extreme side compared to those two items. There are similarities with those two items to this item as well, because this doll was only sold in two countries that weren't necessarily big countries compared to the United States. Certainly, the number of people that bought her must have been a small number. You would have had to have gone to see Return to Oz, number one. And another thing we also don't know is what was the box office for the two countries that this doll was sold in. That's a really great question that we don't have an answer for. This doll was sold in Germany and the UK. And we don't know if Return to Oz did well in either of those two countries. Don't know. It certainly had a contributing factor to how many of these dolls were sold, because there aren't too many of them. But anyways, those are some thoughts as far as what makes an item rare. I think it's definitely who bought the item, who the item was intended for, and age definitely is a factor sometimes. Other times it isn't, because you have, like what I said before, with who actually bought the item. Was it only for adults? That definitely makes a difference compared to if the item was meant for kids. The next contributing thing that makes it difficult if the item was made for kids is if it actually survived being played by kids to then end up in a collection. So that's definitely a big difference between intended for adults, intended for children. What happens to the item and who handles it, those kinds of things too can be a factor. But certainly speaking, as a Wizard of Oz collector who's been collecting for a long time, not all Wizard of Oz items are rare. Not all Wizard of Oz items are common. And not everything in someone's collection could possibly be rare. I certainly have items that are definitely common. And they could definitely be on the older side and still be common. Great example of this is Viewmaster. Over the 20 years that I've been collecting, not only Wizard of Oz Viewmaster reels, but also other Viewmaster reels, the prices of them haven't really changed that much. You can still get either just the plain reels, for the Wizard of Oz ones in particular, for potentially less than $10. That's a really good deal, considering those reels are almost 70 years old, if you want the original ones issued back in 1957. So I hope some of this made sense. What do you think? Is there maybe something that I missed in this equation of what makes something rare, what doesn't make something rare? Let's continue that discussion down in the comments section. And if you liked that video, please give it a thumbs up, comment down below, and subscribe. New videos are posted every 2 weeks on the 15th and last day of each month. And if that doesn't satisfy your appetite for Oz, follow the link in the description to ozclub.org and join the International Wizard of Oz Club. Until next time, bye y'all.